I'm going to start with a test. It's going to be an English test. Okay? You all ready for this? So I'd like you to please stand up. Okay. If you're standing right now, you passed. All right, stay standing, stay standing. I'm going to talk a little bit about employee engagement, and I want to give you some different reference points for employee engagement, okay? So at Aon, when we measure employee engagement, we can segment people into one of four categories, right? There's the actively disengaged, right? The actively disengaged would be someone like this, or maybe like this. Okay, and then there's the underengaged. Somebody who's underengaged would be kind of like this. Okay, and then there's the moderately engaged, and they'd be more like this. And then there's the fully engaged or the highly engaged, and they're like this. So the other test, you failed. And that was, the round of applause was pretty much on the underengaged side. So let's try it again. But let's try it with a little bit more enthusiasm or a little bit more activity. Now, you don't know me, so imagine it's somebody you really wanted to see speak. And in 3 seconds, I want to hear highly engaged applause. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. So on February 8th, it was the most important day of my life, personally and professionally. It was the day that my company, a company that I founded 17 years ago, was sold to Aon. And about 8 hours later, we welcomed our first child into the world. That's Quinn. So imagine that day. I just wanted to share a couple things about me and my life, so you have a better context of who I am. I think Rita had talked about relationships in the intro. And I want you to imagine, you can go lay down if you want or sit down again if you want. I liked you standing. That made me feel really good. I want you to imagine your most important relationship, and you think about that person or those people, and I want you to think about how frequently you communicate with those people, how often you listen to them, have small conversations, have important conversations. It's probably a lot, right? Maybe on a daily basis. And yet, our most important relationships at work are with our direct reports or with our managers, and oftentimes we hear from them only once a year. In fact, we did some research and we found that about half of all organizations are measuring the employee experience through an engagement survey, and they're only doing it annually. Now, if a CEO says, our employees are our most important asset, our employees are how things get done at this organization, why would we only listen to them on an annual basis? It seems far too infrequent. And why would we only do it through an engagement survey? That doesn't seem very effective at all. But there's good news. We found out in another study that we did that about 47% of organizations are moving toward more frequent measurement of the employee experience. So that's good news. And in almost every prospect meeting or client meeting that I'm involved with, the organizations are talking about continuous listening. So what is this concept of continuous listening? I'm getting a lot of feedback here, so sorry about that. I think that's better. What's this concept of continuous listening? Well, it's gathering feedback across the employee life cycle. From the moment somebody's a candidate to when they're onboarded, we measure employee engagement, we measure performance, we do exit surveys, we measure 360s, measuring even alumni surveys, and we're sending out surveys to people who have left the organization, regrettable losses 3 months or 6 months later, to see if they might be consider coming back to the organization. So we're measuring across the employee life cycle, but we're also measuring much more frequently. And that frequency may depend on the organization. But that's the idea of the concept of continuous listening. Why is this shift occurring? Well, the shift is occurring for a number of reasons. Number one, the software has gotten a lot more powerful. It's a lot more cost-effective for organizations to do this sort of thing. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why Aon bought Modern Survey. We have the platform to measure this continuous listening. And Aon didn't. So they knew that this is where organizations are going. So they bought us. So software is getting better. But people have this expectation. If you think about the experience you have, when you go see a movie, Flickster is an organization or a software that allows you to rate the movie that you just saw. Or you can evaluate the driver who just dropped you off here through Uber. And when you order a pair of shoes and you get those shoes, you can in real time provide Amazon feedback or whatever organization delivered those shoes to you feedback. So we have this expectation of real-time feedback as consumers, so why wouldn't we have this expectation as employees? So the expectation is there. And engagement and some of these other KPIs around the employee experience have become very important to CEOs and to leadership teams. And the reason behind that is how value is created in organizations. This is a study that an organization released earlier this year, and they did an analysis of publicly traded companies. These are U.S. companies, but I think it applies globally. And they found that of these publicly traded companies, 16% of the value of that company was determined by tangible assets, things that you could touch, equipment, land, cash, and 84% came from intangible assets, contracts and relationships and software and things that you can't touch. That's people. If you looked at this study 30 years ago, it would have been exactly the opposite. It would have been about 20% intangible assets and 80% equipment and more tangible assets. So people are creating tremendous value. And I was at an event yesterday in Warsaw, and there was a person from Google speaking and a person from LinkedIn speaking. And I used those companies as examples when I was speaking. It turns out that Google's market cap, or the value of that company, is about $244 billion. And if you factor in how many employees they have, each employee is creating about $3.6 million of value for that organization. That's a lot of intangible assets for that organization. LinkedIn, I mean, what do they create? If you sold off all of the assets of LinkedIn, now I know Microsoft bought them for $26 billion, but if you sold off all of the assets that LinkedIn has, you maybe would get $500 million, $1 billion. It's mostly, the vast majority is intangible assets, and people are core to that, central to that. So that's why companies are moving toward continuous listening and continuous measurement of and understanding the employee experience. Now, if you're going to do this, you can learn more at this URL if you're interested. If you're going to do this, you have to keep 5 things in mind. If you're going to move from an annual survey or infrequent measurement to more continuous listening, you need to keep 5 things in mind. And it's important to have somebody to guide you or coach you or consult you along. The first thing to keep in mind is, what are your objectives? Saying that I read it in an article that organizations are moving to continuous listening or more frequent feedback is not a strategy. It is not an objective. You have to have a business reason for doing this. You want to understand employee engagement. You want to understand why people are leaving the organization. You want to understand the candidate experience. Have some objectives. The second thing is governance. Now, we've worked with organizations, and many people throughout the organization are doing their own thing, measuring through their own software, asking their own content. It's really scattered throughout the organization. You need to centralize it. You need to have somebody own that strategy. You need to have somebody advising around the different content and the different timing of these different survey or different feedback mechanisms. So that's really important for you to keep in mind. Third is content. If you're going to be measuring how effectively somebody's onboarded within the organization, it should link up to your engagement survey, and then that should link up with the feedback you're getting from organization or from people as they're leaving the organization. And also, one organization may want to start by just measuring some foundational things, what the environment is like here, what pay and benefits, perceptions of pay and benefits are, and then graduate or move on to something that's more motivating, like how people feel about the confidence of the organization, how effectively people are being recognized. Another organization just might want to measure the same 10 or 12 or 15 items over and over again. Again, your content has to link with your overall objectives and strategy. Fourth is timing. We have organizations that are measuring employee engagement, for example, on a quarterly basis. Others that are measuring on a monthly basis. And even others that are measuring on every other week. So timing is very crucial if you're going to put this in place. And the last thing is action. We don't get anything out of just gathering feedback. We have to do something with it. And this idea of continuous listening is probably a misnomer. It should be more continuous dialogue or continuous conversation. You actually have to act on the feedback and begin a conversation in order for this to be effective. So this is what it might look like for an organization. Actually, one of our clients, it's designed in this way for them. So they're measuring the candidate experience, onboarding surveys, engagement surveys. They actually measure on service anniversaries. They measure exit feedback. It looks like that for them. For your organization, it might look differently depending on what your objectives are. So what does this have to do with happiness and company success? Well, it's pretty simple. We know that when we focus on employee engagement and we measure the employee experience and we act on the data, it does have an effect on how people perceive the organization and how they walk away from that organization at the end of the day. So I don't care about employee happiness, to be honest with you. I care about employee engagement. I want people to be highly engaged, like you were when you applauded. And 97% of the people who are highly engaged are happy. So that happiness is a byproduct. And you know what else is a byproduct of engagement? Customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, and company success. But I think there's a bigger calling and a bigger purpose for this. Number one, if somebody is disengaged, they are not their best self after work. You cannot be the best husband, the best father, the best mother, the best wife, the best friend, the best community member when you're a disengaged employee. It just doesn't work that way. And so when we as a community, when we as human resources professionals can affect the way people perceive work, we affect their happiness, their outlook on life, and society in general. Thanks for having me.